Coming up on this episode, the Warriors continue their dominant play at Summer League with another double-digit victory on Wednesday night, plus the intriguing and unusual situation surrounding Brandin Podziemski right now. And Jonathan Kuminga, the asking price on his next contract, is that scaring away rival teams in potential trade discussions? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. I want to start with some reaction to yesterday's Summer League game against the Cleveland Cavaliers before jumping into some more Brandin Podziemski and Jonathan Kuminga discussions. Of course, they remain in trade speculation as the Warriors' pursuit of Lauri Markkanen continues. But starting with Summer League, another impressive performance from the Warriors, their sixth straight in Summer League so far, of course, dating back to the California Classic where they went 3-0. And of course, now in Vegas, they are 3-0, a 96-85 victory over the Cleveland Cavaliers, obviously playing without Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis, both who played the first two games in Vegas and have been rested over the remainder of the schedule. Good performance, it must be said. They've just been very impressive, this Warriors Summer League outfit. Really good roster put together. Again, yes, they won by 11 points, but the Cavs finished on an 18-6 run, which made the final result look a bit more competitive than what it was in reality. The Warriors led by over 20, in extent of 20 points early in the fourth quarter. So this game was over by practically halftime. The Warriors finished the first half on a 14-4 run, got out to a 54-38 lead at halftime. So the game was pretty much done and dusted by that point. And it was a really good, well-rounded effort. I think the Warriors had 8 players that scored 9 points or more. So that was hugely impressive. Daquan Plowden obviously celebrated his two-way contract that he got on Tuesday with another solid performance, leading the team with 16 points, had 11 points in the first half, 3 of 5 shooting, I think it was, from three-point range in that first half. Finished with 16 on 6 of 11 shooting from the floor, 4 of 9 from three-point range. I actually thought Pat Spencer was probably the more impressive player in this one. He really showed some signs to me. I've been kind of going back and forth since Plowden obviously got that two-way contract, leaving probably Reece Beekman and Pat Spencer, who are, yes, both on two-way contracts at the moment, but one of those will probably make way for Quentin Post. Been kind of going back and forth on who I think should remain on a two-way contract, but Spencer certainly probably edged himself ahead in that race yesterday with an impressive display where he really stuffed the stat sheet across the board. I think he had 13 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals in 27 minutes. Really orchestrated the offense in a way that I didn't think he was necessarily capable. Like, I always viewed him as kind of a combo guard, perhaps even more of a shooting guard. But the way he was able to play make yesterday, his hit-ahead passes, that kind of thing, was really impressive in a way that it kind of swayed my opinion on who should remain. Because I've always seen Spencer as a guy that, hey, he's 28 years old now. Do you really want a 28-year-old on a two-way contract? Or do you want to just see what you've got in a 21-year-old Reece Beekman who went undrafted but has some college experience and has some obvious talent, particularly on the defensive end? Do you want to try and dive into that and see what you may have there? Take the riskier approach rather than a 28-year-old, particularly when you've got a deep roster already with 14 guys who could all essentially play in a rotation next season. But the fact that the Warriors lack point guards and the fact that Spencer was able to come out yesterday and show what he was able to do as a point guard, essentially, that kind of, again, swayed me into thinking, well, if the Warriors do kind of need a third-string point guard, that he might be the option more so than Beekman, even 7 years he's elder. But that might be a good thing in the fact that, again, the Warriors lacking point guard options. Maybe you need to actually throw him out there. Could he run an NBA offense? I have serious question marks on that. But again, he's probably going to be a better option than Beekman in that scenario. So I think you might see him get the two-way deal or retain the two-way deal, and Beekman might have to make way. Hopefully he can stay on a deal with Santa Cruz and try and develop there and maybe wait another 12 months. A bit similar to Lester Quinones in a way, where he was on a two-way deal after he went undrafted in 2022 and then lost his two-way spot just prior to the season, where the Warriors ultimately went with Anthony Lamb and Ty Jerome instead. And then, of course, when Lamb got converted to a standard deal late in the season. That's when Quinones came back on a two-way contract and then spent all of last season on a two-way deal up until, was it February, I think, where he then was converted to a standard contract as well. And now Leicester's future is obviously up in the air. He hasn't re-signed with the Warriors. His future with the Warriors probably is past its due-by date, unfortunately, but hopefully he can get another stint elsewhere. I think he's got the talent to get another stint elsewhere. But I could see a similar situation with Beekman, where he spends a year with the Warriors, developing his game. Of course, that's what Quinones did in 2022-23 when he was the G League's most improved player. Maybe Beekman can do a similar thing, and then in another 12 months' time, or potentially towards the end of next season, he could come back on a two-way deal or something like that. But Spencer, very impressive. I think certainly edged his way ahead in that race if one of those two guys have got to make way for Quinton Post, who missed yesterday's game. Again, he's kind of been anticipating this Quinton Post debut. Obviously very intriguing as a 7-foot kind of sharpshooter, something the Warriors could definitely do with, particularly if they don't get Larry Markkinen. But unfortunately still dealing with this minor leg, foot injury, whatever it is, and he hasn't debuted. I'd have question marks if they'd throw him out for one game at the end, although the Warriors look like they're going to make the semi-finals, so there's probably going to be an additional game there. Who knows? We'll wait and see. The Warriors were also missing Kevin Knox II, who's been a big part of their rotation in the first first 5 games, although I think he might have missed the first one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's been a big part of their team, been the leading scorer off the bench for them. He was also out from yesterday's game. So the fact that Warriors were able to get this comfortable victory against a reasonable Cavs squad who, had they won yesterday, were looking to make the semi-finals as well. That's a really strong performance. And again, I just like this roster. There's a lot of guys that probably aren't going to have too much of an NBA future, but you really like them for this kind of summer league level. Like they are really guys that look above the summer league level. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate to the NBA level or whether they're going to get opportunities or not. Obviously, the Golden State roster is pretty limited on who they could potentially acquire. Like unless there's a trade here that opens up some roster spots, it's hard to see any of these guys getting a gig with the Warriors. They're really just trying to show their wares for other teams potentially. But like you look at it, we spoke about Plowden and Spencer, who are on the roster as two-way guys. But even guys like Ethan Thompson, who I spoke about before, like he's been impressive. Jackson Rowe has got size at the forward position. He can shoot 3-6 from 3 yesterday, 13 points. Roman Sorkin, similar as well, got some size at the center position, can shoot the ball a little bit. Took advantage of TJD not being there yesterday, had 13 point, 10 rebound, double-double. Knox, who I spoke about, obviously got huge amount of talent as a former top 10 pick. I spoke about previously, like he doesn't have, he's never had, I think, the opportunity to play in a good system on a winning team. Like he's played at the Knicks when the Knicks were pretty trash. He's played at the Pistons when they were pretty trash. Played the Trailblazers when they've been pretty trash over the past couple of years. Like never has been in a good system. And I do wonder, like, is that a guy, if the Warriors did make a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 trade, whether or not he could potentially, make his way onto the roster with some vacant spots there. Of course, they could waive Guy Santos and Lester Quinones, Guy Santos and Lindy Waters the third. I don't think they'd do that. I don't think Kevin Knox has shown that much at this stage where you'd be doing something like that. But we'll wait and see. And I think these guys should be, obviously trying to do their best to advertise themselves, probably for other teams. But again, who knows? If there's a 2-for-1, 3-for-1 trade, roster spots open up, then maybe the Warriors could look at some of these guys. Let's move on. I wanted to talk about Brandin Podziemski again for a little bit. This is an unusual situation where I can't really, at least from a Warriors perspective, I can't really see a comparison here in recent history where this has happened, where this guy has not played an NBA game for over 3 months. Like the Warriors' last game was April 10 or something, was it, when they lost the play-in tournament? It might have been closer to mid-April. Anyway, it's been over 3 months since Brandin Podziemski played in an NBA game. And if you'd asked me like 2 or 3 weeks ago, okay, what do I think of this guy? I would say, and I did say on this podcast, I said, okay, very impressive rookie season. Very impressive. All rookie first team honors. Couldn't have done more, really, in terms of impressing the fan base and me personally. However, I still think he's a high-end role player. in the NBA. I don't think he necessarily has all-star potential. In the space of 2 weeks, that has like flipped on its head without really doing anything but play in some summer league games where, as a guy who, like, part of me thinks, okay, you were all rookie first team last season. Of course you should be impressing in summer league and playing well. Like, you should be above the level. But there's something going on here which is, it's unusual because you just do not see a guy's stock and value rise, I think, as much as it has in the past 2 or 3 weeks when it's the middle of the offseason. Like, this guy hasn't, like, he's played summer league where he should be playing well. And of course he had the scrimmages with the Team USA select team against the Olympic squad in Vegas before that. So yeah, he's been playing a little bit, that's fair, but he hasn't played an actual NBA game for over 3 months. And yet his value and his stock, like, has risen quite significantly, I think, over the last couple of weeks. And I just think that's really unusual for any player in the absolute middle of the offseason, when, again, he literally hasn't played an NBA game in over 3 months. And so this is coming from, so why has this happened? Why has this happened? Well, it's coming from a range of areas, right? I think a lot of it, not a lot of it, but, you know, there has got to be some part of it that comes from the fact that he's in trade rumors, right? And so you've got multiple things. You've got Pods a couple of weeks ago coming out in that interview with Sportskeys Mark Medina and stating that I want to be a second star for Steph. I want to be in the most improved discussion next season. And part of me at that point was like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, you can think that. Do I think you're necessarily going to be a second star for Steph Curry or being the most improved discussion next season? Probably not. Like, I think that's, you know, quite a ambitious goal to set for yourself. And is it a realistic one? Maybe not. But since that point, it's like, okay, he's not the only one that thinks this, that has this belief in himself. It's coming externally as well. And for all the impressive play of Daquan Plowden and Pat Spencer and the Warriors in general getting the win over the Cavs yesterday in Summer League, the biggest thing emanating from that game was Joe Lacob's interview during the third quarter, where he stated that we believe we have a future all-star in Brandin Podziemski. And again, that took everyone, you know, out of breath kind of thing. They said, oh, okay, right. So now you also believe that he can be an all-star rather than a high-end role player. And you can say, oh, of course they're going to say that about their own player. Of course they're going to have high hopes for him. Listen to what Joe Lacob used to say about James Wiseman and that kind of thing. But just a point of clarity after that, which came from Bay Area News Group's Danny Emmerman, which I think is almost more important than Joe Lacob's quote in itself, was that he was responding to Lacob's comment and said, no, this is not a case of the Warriors just trying to build up their own player and thinking highly of their own player. He stated on X/Twitter that he's spoken to rival executives and they are very, very high on Brandin Podziemski. And this is not a case of the Warriors just building up their own player, but a case of, hey, the league is very high on this guy and what he could potentially become in the league. So again, in the space of 2 weeks, it's gone from high-end role player, that might be the most realistic outcome for him, to, oh, hang on a second, do I have to reconsider this? Do we as fans have to reconsider that this guy actually could have all-star potential? And again, part of that has got to come from the fact that he's now in trade rumors and the fact that the Jazz would reportedly prefer him, according to Shams, prefer him over Jonathan Kuminga. That's certainly a part of it. But I think it's just fascinating. Like, I think it's really fascinating, the fact that this guy's value just seems to be soaring during the middle of the offseason. Like, when has that ever happened? Now, yeah, it happens with guys who are part of trade rumors. Absolutely. But I think there's something more to this than that. I think it's like the Warriors genuinely believe they have a future All-Star, not just because he's in trade rumors and they're trying to make sure his value's high. So, the Jazz accept a deal that involves him and a couple of picks or whatever for Lauri Markkanen. I think the Warriors legitimately think they have a future All-Star. I think Brandin Podziemski legitimately thinks he can be a future All-Star. And again, going back to Emmerman's quote on Twitter, like, other rival executives are super high on him. It's not just the Warriors. So I think it's super unusual. Do the Warriors try and take advantage of this and say, well, okay, his value is super high right now. Are we going to include him in a deal for Markkanen? Or do they think that, no, like, we actually want to protect this guy? And the contractual stuff is certainly a big part of it. Like, he's under contract for 3.7 million next season, maybe 4 the year after, and 5.7 or something like that. Like, it's 3 years, $13 million, which is huge. When you've got, if Brandin Podziemski is what he was last season, then you've got great value for the next 3 years. If he just did what he did last season for 3 years straight from here on, that's huge value based on his contract, let alone the fact that you think this guy has all-star potential and what he could potentially get to. So that's a big part of it, the contract. And that's a big part of why Utah are going to value Pods over JK. There's little doubt about that. And so I wanted to get into Jonathan Kuminga, because I just listened to the Warriors Plus Minus podcast with the Athletics' Anthony Slater and Tim Kawakami. Very interesting discussion they had on Jonathan Kuminga, where they were looking at his potential contract extension, mentioned Franz Wagner, and the idea that Jonathan Kuminga could see the contract, 5 years, $224 million, that Franz Wagner just got, and think to himself, okay, I was taking a pick before him. I think that if given the same opportunity, I can be a legitimately better player than that guy. And I think he's right in that belief. Personally, I think Jonathan Kuminga, if given the opportunity to spread his wings, he can be a better player than Franz Wagner. You look back at the stats from the second half of last season, they are eerily similar in terms of points, efficiency. Kuminga a little bit more efficient, rebounding, all those type of things. Very, very similar stats over the second half of last season. And so if you're Jonathan Kuminga, do you think you can get that kind of money? Do you risk not taking an extension this offseason in the thought that, hey, I can have a huge year 4 and get to that point where I can command that kind of money? And from the Warriors side of things, Slater was kind of pointing out, well, if they can get Kuminga on a 4-year 130, 4-year 140, something between $30 and $35 million a season, then that might be worth it for them right now to get him on that contract, rather than obviously risking him developing to a level where it's like, okay, now we're going to have to pay upwards of $40 million, nearly $50 million for this guy, which is a lot of money. Particularly when talking about he's on the final year of his rookie deal, making $7.6 million or whatever this season. Anyway, it's very interesting that Slater said that, and Kawakami immediately kind of came over the top of him almost and said, no, it's more than that. The asking price for Jonathan Kuminga is much more than that in terms of, and it basically sounded like, and I don't want to quote them directly or aggregate them directly, but essentially they made it sound like Kuminga's camp is probably asking for closer to that $40 million rather than $35 million right now, which makes it very interesting. And this is where I want to direct. This is a direct quote from Kawakami in the podcast episode. He said, "The Clippers were wary of Kuminga even entering the conversation." This is for Paul George, because of what that ask was going to be. "I had heard that Kuminga wasn't a great trade asset around the league because of that money." So the keyword there is labeled, he's not a great trade asset around the league right now. Because, again, of Kuminga's camp saying, okay, for an extension to be agreed upon, you're going to have to pay, maybe it's 4 years, 160 or something like that. And it's, again, closer to that $40 million rather than 30, 35. So that, I think, is really intriguing. And I think that's a big factor here. Again, Kuminga, not a great trade asset right now. And I can understand that. I can understand if you're a young rebuilding team like the Utah Jazz, who you want to have your financial flexibility open in the next few years, see some young guys develop, and then kind of like what the Thunder have done, then you can go out and splurge and pay overs. Like the Thunder just paid overs for Isaiah Hartenstein. Okay. Is that necessarily a great deal for them? Not necessarily. It's, paying Isaiah Hartenstein nearly $30 million a season. I wouldn't do that. But the Thunder can, because they've got these young guys on great rookie deals for the next couple of years, and they can make that move. And that's what I think that's a pathway the Jazz are clearly going to want to try and follow, right? But they need to get that high-end young talent first, which is exactly why we're having these marketing discussions, because as I've said at length, having marketing will help them win games, and they don't want to do that, which is just like exactly why they're hopefully, from a Warriors standpoint, or potentially looking to get rid of him, right? And so I just think it makes a lot of sense that the Jazz wouldn't want to get Kuminga in the trade and then have to turn around and pay him $40 million a season. Like, that is not what they want to do. They want to get rid of marketing, and in doing so, get the draft assets and everything from Golden State, but also get the financial flexibility to pick and choose when go time is for them in the next couple of years. When it's like, okay, we've got these young pieces in place. Now it's time to ascend and go out and splurge money on free agents or potential trade piece, whatever it may be. So I can understand that. I can understand that that the Clippers didn't want to say, okay, not only are you asking us to take on Chris Paul's $30 million and Andrew Wiggins' $26 million a year for the next 3 years, whatever it is, you're also asking us to trade for Kuminga, where we're also going to have to pay that guy $30, $35, $40 million from 2025, 26 onwards. So again, there's conjecture about whether Kuminga was actually part of the deal or not. Like, it's been kind of, Kawakami says there were discussions with him in it. I think Ramona Shelburne it was that said he wasn't. Kawakami did say in the episode that Paul George was keen to play with Kuminga at the Warriors. And so again, maybe Kuminga wasn't part of it too much at all. But there's no doubt here that the contractual situations, the contrasting contractual situations between Kuminga and Podziemski is the key reason why Podziemski is, I think, valued far higher right now than Kuminga is. Because I think if you just look at them as players, like, if the thing you got to remember about this as well is they're both the same age. Like, they're both 21 years old. It's not like Kuminga's like 2 years older than him. It's just he's got 2 more years of NBA experience. And so I think, like, as much as this, like, Podziemski value is soaring right now, I still think if the contractual part of it was put to one side and you just said to me, who would I rather have going forward, Brandin Podziemski or Jonathan Kuminga? Now, okay, maybe it might depend on what the rest of my roster looks like, but if I was starting from scratch, if you just take everything out of it and say, who do I want moving forward, I'm still taking Jonathan Kuminga, right? I'm betting on that upside. And a guy who, over the second half of last season, showed that he can average 20 points a game. Pods hasn't showed that. He's shown that he can impact the game in a multitude of ways, but he still only averaged 9.2 points a game last season. And to become a star in this league, you need to average 20 points a game. Kuminga is closer to that than Podziemski. And of course he would be. He's 3 years into the league. However, he's still only 21 years old, which is the same age as Podziemski. And so I just think it's super fascinating, the contractual situations of these players and how it dictates the value. And it happens all the time with players, right? We understand that. But the contrast between Kuminga and Podziemski, and therefore why Podziemski is valued so much higher than Kuminga, even though I would still take Kuminga, just from a pure playing standpoint, I would still take Kuminga over Podziemski if I was building a team going forward. But again, the contractual standpoint means that's not the case right now for rival teams. And it's really interesting. And it's all part of discussions that the Warriors are going to have internally, that the Warriors are going to have with rival teams. Like, is there a team out there that's willing to pay Kuminga who would give up first round picks for him, and then the Warriors can flip that to the Jazz? And maybe there's a package with the Jazz that, the Warriors keep Podziemski, and it's not only all the Warriors picks, but a couple more picks they get from Kuminga. That's what I'm floating out there, but maybe that's not possible with Kawakami saying that Kuminga right now is not a great trade asset because of what he is asking for in his next contract. So very interesting. The last factor I kind of wanted to bring up was, again, Kawakami. I've spoken about this previously, but Kawakami bringing up the fact that, and quote, like, Markkanen's wishes are overlooked. That was the word, overlooked, in this whole scenario where we're always looking at what the Warriors are potentially willing to give up, what the Jazz potentially want to get in return, without necessarily looking at what Lauri Markkanen wants. And I've spoken about this before, but just to go back over it, August 6th is obviously the date where we look at this and see, will the Jazz and Lauri Markkanen agree to a contract extension on August 6th? That allows him to obviously get his money, but also for the Jazz, for him to be trade eligible on the final day of the trade deadline on February 6th. All right? There's that. And then if he doesn't sign on August 6th, which I think, and Kawakami said it's likely that it probably passes with nothing, because this is where Markkanen's stronghold on the situation comes in, where he can say on August 6th, no, I'm not signing it, because I think you're just going to turn around and trade me on February 6th. And he might want to see if I wait a day, 24 hours, is that same offer, like same contract offer, still going to be on the table for me? Or is the contract offer only there because they know they can trade me on February 6th? So I could understand from his perspective, I wouldn't be doing it. I'd wait, see if the offer is still there on February 7th. On August 7th, I should say. If it is, and you're happy to be in Utah, then you sign it, because you know you've got at least 1 full year before they can trade you again. Of course, if you don't want to be in Utah, you could just refuse to sign it altogether. August 7 comes, August 8 comes, August 9 comes, August 10 comes. The further it goes without an extension, the less leverage Utah has, because the closer it gets to Lauri Markkanen's contract expiring. And again, it's the same situation as I spoke about a few episodes ago, similar situation with Pascal Siakam, where the Warriors, speculation whether the Warriors could trade for Pascal Siakam last season. And then after he gets traded to the Pacers, we get the report that Siakam wasn't interested in re-signing with the Warriors. And if he makes that known, which his camp would prior to a trade, then that team is not going to give up assets to get that player. It's exactly what Markkanen can do. Markkanen can, if he doesn't want to go to the Warriors, the Warriors could come calling and say, will you re-sign with us? If he says no, the Warriors are automatically out. They're automatically out. They move on. Right? Or if another rival team does that and he says, no, I only want to go to the Warriors, then that team's out. And all of a sudden, the rival bidders dissipate, essentially. And therefore, there's no teams bidding against each other, and therefore Utah's leverage is gone. And what are you going to do if you're Utah? If he's not willing to sign an extension, what are you doing? Like, are you just letting it play out for the rest of the season? And the longer it goes, you lose your leverage, and then there's the potential that he walks for nothing in free agency. Like, the longer it goes, the more likely a trade comes in terms of if he doesn't sign an extension. And that is exactly why the Warriors are willing to wait, because they understand if August 6th comes and there's no extension forthcoming, that Utah's leverage, as I think Slater quoted, like a big chunk of their leverage drops if there's no extension on August 6th. And the further days keep going, the better it is for the Warriors or any other rival team in terms of what they could get Markkanen for price-wise in a trade. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, I'll finish it up there. Thank you very much for listening or watching to this episode. If you've made it through to this point, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Been absolutely fantastic support over the past few weeks throughout free agency and the off season. Got past 600 subscribers. 700 is the next goal. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And other than that, guys, I'll see you in the next episode.